Monetary Institute. Today we're going to quickly talk about the Barclays Bank PLC pullout. It's being touted as a takeover, but it's basically Barclays Bank are pulling out of Zimbabwe. And our aim is not trying to nix the deal. Our aim is clear in posting these things, that never, never, never again should we have hyperinflation in Zimbabwe. So we're trying to educate the public about what banking is and what banks do. And we also want to end the bank creation of money, because the banks in Zimbabwe have abused their privilege. It's an accounting privilege and a banking custom, as we've talked about before. And we're trying to stop them from creating money. So this goes back to what was talked about in the first economics book in the English language. The first, it was the principles of political economy, written in 1767. This is 9 years before Adam Smith wrote The Wealth of the Nations, and it was by James Stewart. And he said the main goal in economics of a country is self-interest, and we believe this is in our self-interest to try to raise a brouhaha over this, go to the Competitions Commission, go to everybody who's going to approve this deal, and make a brouhaha and put forward what our points are. We believe it's an opportunity. So our recommendation for all of those who want to know what we want to get to, because we might go a little bit in a roundabout manner to getting to the recommendation here, but we're going to say it straight away, because some of the arguments are a little bit long. So we're saying that no foreign-owned bank or foreign-controlled bank should be allowed to create money, especially in the light of what has happened in Zimbabwe. It's not that our local bankers are good people, or it's not that we're blaming the foreign banks on doing it, but we believe this could be a first step, because other countries in the world are adopting the stance that foreign banks are not allowed to create money in their country. So we're going to go through a background of what money creation is and what inflation is, because we believe this basis is very important for us to be able to make our point. Because some people will be looking at this for the first time, and they won't have seen our previous videos. They might see this one first. So we need to make this video stand alone, in that it explains everything that it says in it. We have no quibble with the Malawians. We were in a federation with them around 1953 to about 63. We were part of British Central Africa. We're governed as that, which was basically the Rhodesias and Nyasaland. Those countries have all changed their names since, but it was basically Zimbabwe, Malawi, and Zambia. And also an interesting point when we look at what has happened between those three countries, is when the British South Africa Company, which was asked by Britain to manage these colonies for it, when the British South Africa Company was wound up, they were given 2 million acres in the Rhodesian and Nyasa land. In Zimbabwe, I'll just give you some of the land so that for some of you who understand Zimbabwe, they're given places like Malelangwe, they're given Triangle Estates, they're given Hippo Valley, they're given some sugars, Mukwasini, some sugar estates, some ranches that are now like Willoughby's estates and all these other goods. And what happened is, soon after the British South Africa company received that, they consolidated these assets into Anglo-American. And this is clearly there for the record. When they had their centenary, they boasted it up. I learned this as a young man in the early 70s in school. So, and I believed at the time that the land reforms were taking place, I believe that they should have first taken the farms that were the bounty of the invading force, because it was the British South Africa Company which invaded Zimbabwe. And I don't have anything against any Malawians. All the Malawians are made to be nice people. So the basis of everything, of what's going to be made here, is basically found in publications that were done by central banks. The German central bank, the Bundesbank, issued a publication in 2013 in German on money creation. And the Bank of England followed suit in 2014. And it published about how a modern money system works. You know, before these two publications by these banks, we had to resort to literature that's almost more than 100 years. Some of us had seen this in practice, and it was not described in any of the economic books. So it was very hard to talk about, and we were threatened with death if we talked about it, because some of us got to know by accident. So I'll give that story sometime, but I just noticed something fishy, and I looked at it, and these guys were creating money and by just using bank balances. The thing is, we use bank balances for money, and these bank balances are created by a journal entry. So what happens is, if you get a loan from the bank, that money that you're receiving has been created. It has not existed before. They simply debit a loan account and put the money in your account. That is all they do. They do not wait for a customer to deposit money into your account. And so in that Bank of England publication, it said that 97% of what is used as money in the UK is created by commercial banks. 3% is created by the government. And that 3% by the government is what is created by the Bank of England. Because the Bank of England was nationalized in 1946 after the Second World War, immediately after the war. And in that publication by the Bank of England, so what basically happens is, government, analyzing this statement, government, through its budgets, through the budgeting process in Parliament, is only controlling 3% of the money in the economy. The banks are controlling 97% of the money in the economy. So we ask the question, who is running the economy? It is clearly the banks that are running the economy. In our first video, we stated our position, and this is the position of monetary systems and the study of monetary system, that money was created to provision government, to provision the sovereign government, to position the democratic government. Government should be controlling 100% of the money in creation. Government, by being the representatives of the people, should be controlling 100% of the money in the economy. The banks should not be controlling 97% of what we use as money. So in this publication, the one from the Bank of England is quite comprehensive. They say banks are not mere intermediaries, and when they go on to explain what they mean, they do not wait for money to get deposited before they can lend. They in fact start lending first and the deposits follow. So what they do is they lend first before the people deposit. So they do not wait for grandma or grandpa to deposit money into the account before they can lend. They must lend first. They do not, you can see this with banks like Roger Walker's United Merchant Bank. He was lending money with no depositors. Nobody deposited money into his bank. You can see it also happened with a bank called ENG, which was an overnight phenomenon in Zimbabwe. They lent money without any deposits. And they lent it to themselves. F, friends, family, fools. They lent it to their friends and the family. In this article, they also go and say the money multiplier is a myth. It doesn't happen in practice. I went to the Ministry of Finance. I talked to an economist. She seemed very knowledgeable. And she thought the money multiplier was in effect. And clearly the Bank of England says the money multiplier is a myth. It does not happen in practice. It's just academic stuff. And also they go on and say they, as a central bank, do not control the amount banks create. And this is an admission. There's some heterodox economists who go out and say banks control the amount of money. The central bank controls the amount of money. The Reserve Bank controls the amount of money the banks make. They don't really control it. They can put sanctions on a bank. But the money control element, the central bank does not tell them how much money the banks can make. The banks do it by themselves, the commercial banks. And this is these two publications by these two central banks are the most important in about 150 years of publications by these banks. Anyway, the Bundesbank was formed after World War II, and it's a corporation fully owned by the government of Germany. As I said, the UK Bank of England is 100% owned by the government, and it's an integral part of the government after nationalization. So these bank balances are more important than cash, because these once in a lifetime, or maybe twice or three times in a lifetime, purchases are made using bank balances. So when you buy a house, a car, land, stands, loans, business purchases, import stuff, or even buy furniture normally for normal people, where they pay cash or by check or by electronic funds transfer. You use bank balances, and these are very important. So we're just going to quickly go through them. For the accountants among you, they debit the loan, how the bank creates money. This is just the accounting entries. Debit loan in the name of the customer, credit current account or deposit account in the name of the customer. So they make the loan and put the money in the customer's account. That's basically it. In the past, people will say it never happened in Zimbabwe. I saw it, it was in the 80s, it was happening in the finance houses. Barclays Bank, we were talking about, had a division, as they called it, called Finco, and it was, some of you would remember the adverts, call Finco for finance. Finco, that's where the money creation happened until the software got sophisticated enough that the loan module in the bank program could be controlled by a separate password and could be separated from the rest of the banking system. So these journal entries could not be seen by everyone else working in the bank, by only those people that are controlling the loan portfolio. And this was done on the guise that it was privacy, but the main thing they were trying to hide there was bank creation of money. And the finance houses were put into the bank later on under the guise that they were changing the way banks operate. Banks could now have a holding company, so they let the finance houses, the divisions having the finance houses were now integrated into the bank. So we then go and say, how is this bank creation related to inflation? It is very simple. Inflation is caused when bank balances rise exponentially, coupled with inflation. So, with speculation. So what we're saying is, it's like a flow. If they create these bank balances, what now matters is a matter of what? It's a part of sovereignty. Part of sovereignty decides who gets the money first. So the banks are exercising this bit of sovereignty. They decide, in this case, that the money goes to the stock market. So the stock market is the first person to receive this money before it gets into the economy. The stock market will shoot up. The prices will rise. There will be an upswing on the market. If they decide that they're going to put money, let's say, into a town like Gweru, they will go in and finance people to buy land and stands in Gweru, because the price of land, the price of that commodity is generally the price that the bankers want to set, because they are controlling the finance in that activity. So they can make the prices rise. So what we're saying, in that case, they're speculating in the land in Gweru, and so the land in Gweru will rise. And then we get these, what economics will call phenomena. If the banks use that money, that M3, that increase in bank balance, they increase the bank balances by giving loans, they do it to people who are speculating in the currency, or into gold, or into silver, or other specific commodities that under certain circumstances, it will cause hyperinflation. So, like the hyperinflation in Germany was caused when the the central bank put its money into speculating on gold. The Zimbabwe hyperinflation was caused when when the banks funded the speculators to go into buying of foreign currencies, and especially the US dollar. So you need two things. You need increase in M3, and you need that directed to a certain area, and that's what we call speculation. And our fear is that hyperinflation can happen again. I was not in Zimbabwe at the time of the hyperinflation, but I talked to quite a number of people, and it was a terrible time. And what we're saying, hyperinflation can happen again, because Parliament and government did not investigate, have hearings. They did not have a commission of inquiry. The most important thing in an economy is its money. Money is the most important invention in economics, in monetary system, in the way that we transact. The failure of a money, the failure of a currency is of such important significance that the government should have had a commission of inquiry into it. Read the Commission of Inquiries Act, and clearly this action, this event needed to be thoroughly investigated. Two, the population has zilch, has zero understanding about hyperinflation. I've talked to quite a few people the last 2 months especially, and basically everybody blames the government on hyperinflation, but government, it is nearly impossible for the government to hyperinflate. If you read, I think it's W.A. Shaw, The History of Currency, and he talks about the pre-banking era in England. And he says the worst debasement that ever happened in England, this is equivalent to inflation, was 15%. And this happened during the reign of Henry VIII. Otherwise, the monarchs, before the banks came in their present form, because I think the first modern bank was the Bank of Sweden, 1661, and followed by the Bank of Amsterdam, and then you have the Bank of Amsterdam might have been earlier, and then followed by the Bank of England. But the Bank of England is the one that we, because of the British Empire that came afterwards, is the one that is modeled and the one that is pertinent in us looking back at it. So what we need to do is to educate that the commercial banks create money. And this is very important for people to know, because once they know, the banks cannot hyperinflate. The worst thing the banks want is the people versus the banks. The banks use the people. They take over the power of the government. They take over the ability of the government. And the new constitution, Zimbabwe had a new constitution in 2013. And it's a very bad constitution monetary-wise. Let's look at why it is a bad constitution by looking at what happened in Germany. On May 22, the law establishing the independence of the Reichsbank, and withdrawing from the Chancellor of the Reichsbank, and withdrawing from the Chancellor of the Republic, of the Reich, not from the Reichsbank. The Chancellor of the Reich, any influence on the conduct of the bank's business was promulgated. So what happens is the Chancellor or the President of Germany was told not to interfere with the affairs of the Reichsbank, which was the central bank in Germany, in the Weimar Republic. And a few months later, you had one of the worst hyperinflations in history. That was the worst hyperinflation at that time. And what happens is the independence of the central bank can easily lead to the banks, the commercial banks, hyperinflating. This quote is from Stephen Zarlinger's Lost Science of Money, 2002, which is an excellent reference book for monetary, for people trying to look up monetary facts and monetary of what happened. The late Stephen Zarlinger. And this book is available freely for download from the American Monetary Institute at monetary.org. So we then wonder where the bankers or where the parliamentarians got this notion of independence of the central bank, because it is supposed to be a principle, but this principle is not found in the US Constitution, it's not found in the UK Constitution. Well, UK does not have a constitution, but the Bank of England is fully nationalized. It's part of the UK government. In Germany, it is a corporation fully owned by the government. In the US, the right to create money still resides under Section 1, Article 8 of the US Constitution. It still resides with Congress. Congress has the power over the money creation. But in Zimbabwe, this has totally been given to an independent bank and to a protege of the guy who gave the biggest hyperinflation in the world to date. We go back to history and see that money creation is a sovereign right. It was the divine right of kings. It was considered sacred. If we look at different empires, you could not even talk about taking this away from the king. It was a divine right. So what we are saying is foreign-owned banks, foreign-controlled banks should not be allowed to create money. These banks, if they operate, should be constrained to only lending what has been deposited by customers, invested by shareholders, and what they've maybe borrowed from wherever they decide to borrow. So this idea about foreign banks not being allowed to create money is not an idea I'm coming up with. I got this idea from a guy called Michael Hudson. He's a professor at Bard College in New York, and is a distinguished professor of research at the University of Missouri, Kansas City. He's an advisor to the US, Canadian, Mexican, Russia, and other governments. And I was in a library in Canada, and I came across this book in the catalog. This book was of official advice to the Canadian government, and it was the only time I've actually seen official advice, official monetary advice, official economic advice to a government in my hands, and I had an afternoon to read it. I went back the following day, put the book back where I had found it. The book could not be found. I went there early in the morning, first thing in the morning. The book was called Canada in the New Monetary Order, Borrow, Devalue, Restructure 1978. And it was very comprehensive, and it taught me a few monetary lessons. Some of you are not familiar with the work of Michael Hudson. He wrote a book in 1971 called Super Imperialism, which is a good read, Killing the Host. He wrote about America's century of protectionism from 1815 to around 1914. And he's got a few YouTube clips. And he does appear on Real News Network. If you have the internet, which I suppose you have, and you go to Real News Network, you bring up Michael Hudson. He comes up there and he expresses his views once in a while on there, and sometimes he goes and visits a guy called Max Kaiser, who's on Russia Today. Basically, in that publication by Butterworks in 1978, Michael Hudson goes and puts forward the case that foreign banks normally abuse the money creation because for example, if they decide to hyperinflate, they don't have to live in that country that's being hyperinflated. If they decide to cause a deflation, they don't even live in the country that's being deflated. He basically goes and says their banks will, because the more money the banks create, the more money, the more influence they have. So they will abuse the money creation privilege. So they should not be given it. It is a sovereign right to kings. It's part of the monetary sovereignty, and it is the most important part of monetary sovereignty about who creates money. So in his advice, he told the Bank of Canada and the Canadian government that they should stop foreign banks from creating money. Otherwise economics never talks about bank creation of money, but Michael Hudson there clearly says it and clearly gives it to the Canadian government. So as a result of this, Barclays was in Canada. It was a very big presence in Canada, and they've since left Canada. So in Canada you have four main banks, which is RBC, which is Royal Bank of Canada, TD, which is Toronto Dominion Bank, Scotia Bank, which is the Bank of Nova Scotia, BMO, which is the Bank of Montreal. These are all Canadian banks. The first three are headquartered in Toronto, the other ones first two are headquartered in Toronto. One is in Halifax. I think it's still in Halifax, and BMO is in Montreal. And then you have National Bank in Desjardins, which is part of Old Mutual. So You have no big foreign banks in Canada. You don't have any of the U.S. banks who are very big, and Canadian border and the U.S. border is the longest border in the world. So you see this advice being taken and implemented over time. So and 80% of Canadians live within 2 hours of the U.S. border. You are in Canada. You only really in the public domain. You only really have one bank which is really active, which is the Bank of America, and they're active selling basically U.S. dollar credit cards. In Canada, I just took that as an example because that was an example of what the advice that was being given. You have territories like Hong Kong and I think called Malaysia, Singapore. In their banking legislation, they are given the ability to impose additional restrictions and requirements to foreign-owned and controlled banks. Very important. Okay, so we've seen Michael Hudson talked about it in the official advice to the Canadian government. I remember sharing with this with a civil servant some time ago, just a month or so ago, and they said, "How come no one else is talking about it? Is there anyone else besides you talking about it?" And I said, "No," and it says, "Well, then he was reluctant. He's a typical civil servant, reluctant to do anything." So one of the reasons why no one else talks about it is mentioned here by Alexander Delmar in 1904 in The Science of Money. He says, of all the elements of political economy is what economics is today. It's simply when they put in microeconomics, then became economics. It didn't become political economy only. So political economy is basically what is macroeconomics today. It says of all the elements of political economy, money is the chiefest. It's not the chief, it is the chiefest. It is more than the chief, it's a superlative. He says of all the institutions of money, now when he's talking about the chiefest, he says of all the constitutions of money, the right to create it is the most important. It's like a pyramid. Top of the pyramid is the right to create money, because this is 30. If we take the percentages given to us by the Bank of England as a typical economy, which are right, because almost most economies, they create 95% of the money, the banks, and the government creates 5% and less. So we are talking here about expenditure that is 20 times more than what the government budget is, than what parliaments gather around and talk about. Every year the budget comes out in that August house. They come and they specialize in minors, in the smaller things. The big things are happening at the banks. They are spending 20 times more than the government. And government money is distributed amongst many, many more people than those distributed to by the banks. But he says, yet not a word concerning this one sacred right is to be found in any of the economists. He is telling you right there what the purpose of economics is. It is to distort the economy and make sure that people do not talk about money. Okay, Delmar's hierarchy of the economy looks like this. Okay, I think the legend didn't come out. I didn't notice that when I transferred it to my phone. So the blue part is the economy. The red part is money. The yellow part is the right to create money. So what Dalmar is saying is that sitting on top of the economy is the money. Sitting on top of the money is the right to create it. The right to create money is the most important thing in an economy. Government, because that's one thing that I thought about when they started taking companies here and indigenizing companies. And they had left out the most important thing. The, the right to create money is the most important right in an economy. In political economy, in economics, money is the most important thing. And economists do not talk about money, they only talk about prices moving up and down like in barter. And then off with they talk about money, they never talk about the right to create money. And that's what creates all our economic problems. Basically, all economic problems can be righted, can be easily righted if the money is right. In that same advice to the Canadian government, Michael Hudson goes and says there are two types of economists, monetarists and structuralists. Monetarists believe if the money is right, if the right view on money is there, all problems are solvable, all problems are doable. But then there are structuralists who want to fix everything else but the money. They'll fix the production, they'll fix that. That's what economic structural adjustment was about. These are structuralists. They fix anything but the money. That is what economics is. Given to us through Adam Smith. They fix everything but the money. The money needs to get fixed. And Delmar is saying that the creation of money is the most important thing in a government. If we look at the history of the US before independence, we'll see that according to the autobiography of Benjamin Franklin, his memoirs, he says that between 1723 and 1750, the state of Pennsylvania had no taxes. It basically just financed the government by printing money. It printed money for all its needs. It spent it directly onto GDP, into goods and services. And they had zero inflation. They had no central bank. They had zero inflation. But they were told by the British government to start taxing their people. And then in 1764, with the Coinage Act, or the Currency Act, as some would put it, they totally prohibited all the colonies from producing money. So with this thing about economics concealing money, we've gone to, I think I heard a minister talk about, he talked about the fourth factor of production was entrepreneurship. Um, this is an economic quote. I think it was first introduced by Paul Samuelson in economics. But if you look in the 1800s, if you look at the history of economic thought, if you look at the monetary history, the German historical school, which was um, wiped out by the First World War, this was one of the reasons for the First World War. The German historical school, which had found money, was wiped out. And the German historical school said bank credit was the fourth factor of production, not entrepreneurship. But you know, Samuelson, we know Samuelson knew this fact, but he goes and says entrepreneurship is the fourth factor of production. But we know that the German school, uh, without going too much into the reasons or why they said this, but it is clear that money is a factor of production. That is why the production will only happen where there's money. And capital, um, which is normally, they're talking about machinery there, they're not talking about money. And people misunderstand that sometimes. But capital, they're talking about the machinery aspect of production. So the fourth factor of production is bank credit, according to the German historical school. So we do have some good economists that do talk about money a lot. Um, and since we're going to talk about Barclays in a little while. Michael Kumhoff of the Bank of England, who now works for the Bank of England, he's of German descent. Previously was with the IMF. He was a head of research. He was a professor at Stanford, and he worked as a corporate banking manager at Barclays in London. He's got a short clip on hyperinflation. He talks about the Chicago plan. He does have another thing on bank creation. So here we've got a top economist, a former professor at Stanford University, talking about bank creation and talking about it in a very passionate manner. So what we're recommending is that the government passes a law or a statutory instrument prohibiting foreign banks from creating money. Some people say this is going to nix the deal. That is not our intention. Our intention is self-interest. It is not trying to nix someone else's interest, but self-interest as a nation. That the banks should clearly, in fact, even all banks should be prohibited from creating money. Money creation is clearly a sovereign right. The right to create money is important. It is very, very important. It is more important than the right to tax. Because taxation, when we look at finance of an economy, finance taxation is a resource drain. Every time the government taxes, it reduces the ability of the economy. It takes away liquidity from the market. It takes away money from the real market, even when bank loans are repaid. Because banks and government are outside the real economy. And so we come back to what we want to reiterate is banks are more powerful than the government. They have control over 97% of the money. They decide who gets that 97% of the money. The poor government only spends 3%. As Stephen Zarlenga of the Zimbabwe, the late Stephen Zarlenga of the American Monetary Institute says that money creation is more powerful than all the branches of government put together. It's more powerful over time than the judiciary, than the legislature, than the executive combined. And we must always remember what Carroll Quigley emphasizes about in the evolution of civilization and in his talks about the evolution of civilization, that the money creation has been put outside the government. This should be the first thing that was democratized, but it has not. It was kept outside and kept by private hands. And this is the system of government we have. And these people in private hands in this country have abused it. So, in essence, when President Mugabe, His Excellency, President Robert Gabriel Mugabe, on the 18th of April, 1980, got a handshake from Prince Charles and Lord Soames. He thought he was getting full sovereignty of the country, but he was not given monetary sovereignty. Monetary sovereignty was kept by the banks. Monetary sovereignty is the ability, one which is a lesser ability, to choose the account of the money of account. So in that instance, he was given that, but that's the smallest bit of sovereignty. Then the other bit of sovereignty is who gets the money first. That is clearly 97% of the time, that is decided by the banks. Okay, and also in those who control the amount of money in the third bit of sovereignty, aspect of sovereignty, is he who controls the amount of money in the economy. That was retained by the banks. So the government cannot be stronger than the banks. The bank has 3%, the bankers have 97%. Carroll Quigley says that monetary sovereignty is the most important bit of sovereignty, because if you lose monetary sovereignty or do not have monetary sovereignty, you are bound to lose other bits of sovereignty depending on who controls your sovereignty. They can take away the other bits of sovereignty that you have. He clearly says that monetary sovereignty has to be asserted. It cannot be assumed. I think the government has to draw a line in the sand and say foreign bank creation is taboo. Even all bank creation is taboo. Money creation should be indigenized. I wasn't a big fan of the farmers getting thrown off their land. As I said early on, I believe the British South Africa Company properties should have been the ones that were indigenized, if that was their intention. But I believe controlling the banks is a more effective way of of taking over the farms. They could get as they've done as the bankers have done in the U.S. They put a lot of small farmers off the land by controlling who gets the loans. I believe that if the government had really thought of a clever way of doing it, if they understood money, they could have done it through loans. They could have they could bankrupted the farmers. Um, that's what they did in the U.S. They got rid of most of the small farmers were off the land. There are fewer and fewer people farming now. The bigger farmers are consolidated, but they've done it through money. As some of you know, the only discrimination that is allowed, that is permitted under law, is price discrimination. Is discriminating through money. If you don't want someone to go to play golf at your golf club, you simply raise the price. You price them out of the market. You make sure the poor people can't play golf. That is allowed. If the government does not want to put a law, we are campaigning that they put a clause or undertaking that FNB, the Malawian bank, which is supposed to take over Barclays, will not create money and will confine itself to only lending amounts deposited by customers and invested by shareholders. So they go under ponderata, like all companies do. They do not create money, as an ordinary company cannot create money. It is then limited by its cash inflows. That's what determines how much it can lend. So basically, we've come to the end of our talk. We're not against any parts of this takeover, but we believe that money creation, which is a sovereign right, that government must take its right and must exercise its right to monetary sovereignty. They should stop the banks from creating money. They should stop whoever takes over Barclays from creating money. They should stop all the banks from creating money, and then government should exercise that right. Economics was built to plunder the colonies. It is not a coincidence that Adam Smith released the wealth and the nature, an inquiry into the nature okay, let's start that again. Adam Smith released his book, An Inquiry into the Nature and Causes of the Wealth of the Nations, in 1776. Is not a coincidence that also American war American Declaration of Independence was in 1776. The British wanted to make a system that would ensure that it could continue to plunder the countries by hiding the, the nature of money, by having countries come to it to borrow, by exploiting those countries and limiting the growth of those countries. That is what economics was built. That is why you go and do microeconomics, so that you're set on barter. And then you go and work and produce and mine simply to get gold or their currency, US dollars or pounds, and you go on a treadmill. That is why economics was created. And we believe that government should get back that right and should exercise that right to create money. We believe that this country will go through an era of prosperity. If you have any comments or suggestions, please put them below. Thank you for listening.